Okay, so this is not tax advice. It's not even considered to be an in-depth examination of the CARES Act. There's a lot of provisions here, a lot of different things we're not even going to talk about, like delaying your tax filings from April 15th to July 15th. What we're going to do is focus on just two provisions. The things that I think we want to talk about today are the free money and then how it impacts your retirement plan. So today I want to talk about these provisions, but I also want to talk about the downside because you as an employer have some choices to make. The CARES Act, as you know, is an acronym for Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security. It's the largest economic relief package in U.S. history, $2.2 trillion. It provides a great opportunity for relief, but there are some decisions to make. It creates a lot of helpful situations, but in some ways they could be harmful. So, in other words, it might be a bit of relief now, but then you might end up later wishing that you had actually not taken that relief once you get down the road. So let's talk about these things. First of all, the free money. For individuals, that's for you and your employees as well, there's the tax rebates, what they keep referring to as a check showing up in everybody's mailbox. Okay, it all depends, of course, on how much you make, but it's pretty straightforward. And most Americans don't have to do a thing. It's just gonna show up and you'll have a check in the mail. What's the downside? Well, there really is none. I mean, you don't have to pay the money back. It's yours to keep, no strings attached, free money. Use it to pay off debt. Use it to cover basic living expenses. Use it to bridge a loss in income that you may have experienced. Businesses can also get some money. Now, small businesses, those under 500 employees, can have an immediate advance of $10,000. Some might even qualify for more. It's called the SBA Disaster Recovery Relief Program. Or the other option is the PPP. The PPP is the Paycheck Protection Program. The PPP actually allows you to take 1 month's worth of payroll and take that 2.5 times, and that's the amount you're eligible for. So as long as you're spending at least 80% of that money on payroll, it is a completely forgivable loan, okay? So what's the downside? Well, with the PPP, there really is not a downside. It's free money. It's like the tax rebate, only it's for the business. Every small business should apply. With the SBA Disaster Recovery Relief Program, it's a loan. It does have to be repaid, but it's repaid at a very low rate, the SBA interest rate. So, by the way, if you have a PPP, and you don't actually use all the money the way you're supposed to. So you use most of it the way you're supposed to, but not all of it the way you're supposed to. The portion that's not used the way it's supposed to be used towards payroll and such, right? No harm, no foul, no penalty, no fine. But the portion that's not used correctly is now no longer forgivable. The portion that's not used correctly has to be repaid and is repaid at that very same low interest rate from the SBA. So it's free money. And that can be a huge bonus to you and to your business as well. What about retirement plans? Okay, so as a plan sponsor, you're gonna have some decisions to make. Whether or not to continue your match, whether or not to allow employees to have greater access to their account, and depending on if you're laying people off, whether or not you might trigger what's called a partial plan termination. So 3 things that you need to decide. First of all, are you gonna continue your match? I'm not a fan, of course, of cutting the match, especially because it can hurt morale. But sometimes a business has to do that. And I think in the current environment, I think most people are going to understand, hey, we're cutting the match because we don't want to have to cut payroll. So I think people are going to be forgiving of that. Just make sure that you communicate well what you're actually doing. The key is, I just want to make sure you know if you're an employer that you have options. Some employers, especially those that have a safe harbor plan, may not feel that they have an option. They may actually feel like, well, we have a safe harbor plan. We're locked into this, so to speak, right? Well, kind of, okay? So a safe harbor match is not discretionary. It's something you've obligated yourself to. Can a safe harbor match be taken away? Can a safe harbor match be reduced or suspended? And the answer is yes. Yes, it can, under extreme economic conditions. Not many people know this because we don't generally have a triggering event like this, but yeah, I think our current environment clearly qualifies as extreme or severe economic conditions. And so under these conditions, it is possible to suspend your safe harbor match. I'm not recommending that. I just want to make sure that you know that you have options. By the way, the reason that you did a safe harbor match is probably to avoid the discrimination testing, the ADP, ACP, top-heavy testing, and so forth. So if you cease to be a safe harbor plan, your plan will now be subject to the testing for the full plan year. So just be aware, it is possible that you could stop the safe harbor match to reduce the expenses, and then at the end of the year, if you fail the top-heavy discrimination test, you may have to make a contribution to the plan that could be in excess of what you had actually done if you had simply stayed with the safe harbor plan. So stopping the safe harbor plan could actually end up being more expensive, so just make sure that you consider that. Talk to me about that if you're not sure. Secondly, what about allowing employees to have greater access to their plan? So there are these provisions under the CARES Act called CRDs, coronavirus-related distributions. It basically opens the door for employees to have greater access to their money. They actually now have the ability to take up to 100% of their plan, 100% of their retirement plan, up to $100,000 without a 10% penalty, and defer the taxes over a 3-year time period, and have the ability to repay the money like a loan once their economic situation turns around within those first 3 years, so that they don't do as much damage to their retirement plan. Sounds amazing, right? I mean, it should be very, very helpful, and it's so helpful that most record keepers are going to treat this as kind of an opt-out provision. In other words, they're just going to put it into your 401k plan or your retirement plan. They're just going to amend the plan to allow for this unless you opt out. So the question is, what should you do? Should you opt out? What's the downside? What's the downside of allowing employees to have greater access like this? Well, there's actually a lot of downsides. First of all, what about taking money out without a 10% penalty? Well, that's fantastic. Being able to take the money out and then defer the taxes over a 3-year period, that's fantastic as well. Like if you take out $60,000, you only owe taxes this year on $20,000. And then you'll owe taxes on $20,000 next year and $20,000 the year after that. So that's a really helpful thing. What about the idea of putting the money back? That's also really, really helpful. Although, let's be honest, we don't really expect very many people to actually put the money back, which takes us to the downside. The downside is most people won't put the money back. The downside is very, very few people would need $100,000. I'm not really sure why the limit is so high. Or even $60,000 to use my previous illustration, or honestly, probably even $20,000. Most Americans are going to deplete their retirement account and then have to work a lot longer once they get towards retirement age, because they simply won't have the money to retire someday because of this event. So here's my suggestion. If you're one of the businesses that's considered to be an essential business, in other words, there hasn't been a huge interruption for your particular workplace, it's our recommendation that if you don't have employees that might be facing this type of a hardship, that you not include this provision. You'll have an ability later to still put the provision back in if you'd like, but our recommendation would be to opt out right now. Others of you have businesses where you actually have some employees that are facing some hardships, and you know people right now that could probably benefit from this. Under those situations, our recommendation is to allow this provision or to opt into this provision, but only do so with our guidance and education. Our team, for instance, is going to help employees think through how much they absolutely need to just get through this short period of time. And our recommendation is to take as little as possible because there is no restriction on the number of CRDs that a person takes. So only take enough to get through this month. At the end of the 30 days, take enough to get through the next month, and so on and so on. But if you think you need $50,000 over the next 3 or 4 months, why take it all now when you could just get by this month with 10, 12, 15,000? Why do we recommend this? Well, maybe it's obvious, but A, we think most people are unlikely to put the money back in. And B, they will end up destroying their retirement account and not doing you or the plan any benefits, and they're actually going to hurt their future. So we think it's probably something that you may want to opt out of. Finally, one other thought for employers that actually may be considering laying off employees, there is this thing called a partial plan termination. So if you actually terminate 20% or more of your workforce, all of those that are affected will become immediately eligible. So you need to be aware that that's a triggering event if it's 20% or more of your workforce that's actually laid off. So my advice is to cut the match before you cut payroll or cut employees. If you're actually having to cut employees, make sure you keep track of how many of them you're releasing, because if it gets to that 20% mark, it's going to trigger this immediate vesting of everybody. So the CARES Act means that there's some free money. And it also means that you have some access to your retirement account, or your employees do, that they've never had before. But there are some downsides, and that's not what a lot of people are talking about right now. Feel free to contact me directly if you have any questions at all, or if you want to talk through how this impacts your particular plan, or talk to your record keeper, or talk to your tax advisor about some of the tax consequences. When we post this on social media, we'll put our toll-free number below the post. Feel free to reach out to me directly. Also, a link to my new book, Repurposement. We hope this helps.